A police officer named Emily accuses an innocent black girl, Layla, of stealing at the grocery store. But when Layla's father shows up, Emily's world is turned upside down by an unexpected revelation. Will this encounter change the course of her life forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Emily Thompson adjusted her police cap as she stepped out of the precinct into the crisp morning air. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her badge on her chest. It was a reminder of her duty, her commitment to keeping the community safe. As she slid into her patrol car, Emily ran through her mental checklist. Everything had to be in order. Rules were rules, and she prided herself on following them to the letter. She started the engine and pulled out onto the street, her eyes scanning the sidewalks and storefronts. Another day, another dollar, she muttered to herself, a hint of weariness in her voice. As Emily drove through the neighborhood, she noticed a group of teenagers loitering outside a convenience store. Her jaw tightened. She slowed the car, eyeing them suspiciously. They weren't doing anything wrong, not technically, but their presence made her uneasy. "Move along," she called out the window, her voice stern. The teens looked at her, surprise and annoyance on their faces. They shuffled away, muttering under their breaths. Emily felt a twinge of satisfaction. Rules were rules, and loitering was against city ordinances. She was just doing her job, keeping things orderly. Further down the street, she spotted an old man struggling with some grocery bags. For a moment, she considered stopping to help, but then she shook her head. That wasn't her job. She was here to enforce the law, not to be a good Samaritan. As the morning wore on, Emily found herself growing increasingly irritated. A jaywalker here, a car parked slightly over the line there. It seemed like everywhere she looked, people were bending or breaking the rules. Don't they understand? She thought to herself. These rules are here for a reason. If everyone just followed them, everything would be so much easier. By lunchtime, Emily had handed out 3 tickets and given countless warnings. She felt tired, but also righteous. She was doing her part to keep the community in line, to maintain order in a chaotic world. As she pulled into the parking lot of a local diner for her lunch break, Emily caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror. She saw a woman dedicated to her job, committed to upholding the law. But there was something else there too, a hardness in her eyes that she didn't quite recognize. For just a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Was she being too rigid, too unforgiving? But she quickly pushed the thought aside. No, she was doing what was right. She was following the rules, just as everyone should. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Emily's shift finally came to an end. She let out a tired sigh, her shoulders sagging slightly as she climbed out of her patrol car. The day had been long, filled with minor infractions and petty rule breakers, but now it was time to tend to her own needs. Emily made her way to the local grocery store, the fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the dimming evening outside. She grabbed a basket and began to wander the aisles, her eyes scanning the shelves for the items on her mental list. As she turned into the cereal aisle, something caught her attention. A young black girl was standing there looking lost and confused. Emily's eyes narrowed as she watched the girl pick up a box, study it intently, then put it back with shaky hands. What's she up to? Emily thought, her police instincts kicking in. The girl, Layla Richards, though Emily didn't know her name, moved slowly down the aisle. Her eyes darted around, never settling on one spot for too long. To Emily, it looked suspicious. Very suspicious. Emily's hand instinctively moved to where her badge would be, but of course she was off duty now. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She pretended to study the nutrition facts on a box of bran flakes, all while keeping Layla in her peripheral vision. Layla picked up another box, this time holding it close to her face as if she were having trouble reading the label. Emily's suspicion grew. Was she looking for security cameras? Planning to shoplift? As Layla moved to the next aisle, Emily followed, her own shopping forgotten. She watched as the young woman's hands trembled slightly while reaching for a can of soup. Emily's jaw clenched. In her mind, this was textbook suspicious behavior. With each passing moment, Emily's certainty grew. She was sure Layla was up to no good, even though she hadn't actually seen her do anything wrong. But Emily knew. She just knew. Layla Richards and her father, Mr. Samuel Richards, had entered the grocery store earlier that evening. Mr. Richards, a respected businessman, was there to inspect the store for potential renovations. He had left Layla near the front of the store, promising to return quickly. "I'll just be a few minutes, sweetheart," he had said with a gentle smile. "Why don't you look around while you wait?" Layla nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. She wasn't used to being in unfamiliar places alone, but she didn't want to disappoint her father. As Mr. Richards disappeared down an aisle with the store manager, Layla took a deep breath and decided to explore. At first, she wandered slowly, taking in the colorful displays and neatly stacked shelves. But as time passed, the busy store began to overwhelm her. The fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the chatter of other customers too loud. Layla's heart started to race as she realized she didn't know where she was anymore. She turned down one aisle, then another, each looking the same as the last. The labels on the products blurred together, and Layla found herself picking up items just to have something to focus on. Her hands shook as she tried to read the ingredients on a cereal box, the words swimming before her eyes. "Where am I?" she thought, panic rising in her chest. "Where's Dad?" Layla moved faster now, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. She barely noticed the concerned looks from other customers as she passed them, her eyes darting around frantically for any sign of her father. The store seemed to grow larger with each step, the ice sleeves stretching endlessly before her. Layla's anxiety peaked as she realized she couldn't even remember which direction she had come from. Tears pricked at her eyes as she clutched a can of soup, her hands trembling visibly. "Dad," she whispered, her voice lost in the bustle of the store. "Where are you?" Emily's eyes narrowed as she continued to watch Layla. The young woman's erratic movements and nervous demeanor only served to fuel Emily's suspicions. She observed as Layla picked up items, only to put them back moments later, her hands visibly shaking. "Definitely up to no good," Emily muttered under her breath, her jaw clenching. As a police officer, Emily prided herself on her ability to spot trouble before it happened. In her mind, Layla's behavior ticked all the boxes of a potential shoplifter. The constant wandering, the fidgeting with products, the darting glances. It all seemed to point to guilt in Emily's eyes. Taking a deep breath, Emily straightened her posture and strode purposefully towards Layla. Her hand instinctively brushed against her hip where her badge rested, a habit born from years on the force. "Excuse me," Emily called out, her voice sharp and authoritative. Layla jumped at the sudden address, nearly dropping the can she was holding. She turned to face Emily, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. Emily's tone was immediately accusatory as she spoke. "What exactly are you doing here? You've been wandering these aisles for quite some time now." Layla opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her hands trembled even more visibly now, and she clutched the can tighter to her chest. Emily's eyes narrowed further. "Well, I asked you a question. What are you doing in this store?" Layla's heart raced as she struggled to find her voice. The stern look on Emily's face only made her more nervous, causing her words to come out in a jumbled mess. I'm waiting for my dad," Layla stammered, her eyes darting around the store. "He's here. Somewhere." Emily's eyebrows furrowed, her frustration growing with each passing second. She didn't believe a word of it. "Your father? And where exactly is he? I haven't seen anyone looking for you." Layla's hands trembled as she tried to explain. He's checking the store. For work. I got lost." Emily's patience was wearing thin. She took a step closer to Layla, her voice rising slightly. "That's not a very convincing story. Why don't you tell me what you're really up to?" By now, other customers had begun to notice the tense exchange. A few people slowed their carts, pretending to examine nearby products while stealing glances at the unfolding scene. Layla felt the weight of their stares, which only heightened her anxiety. She tried to take a deep breath, but it came out shaky and uneven. "Please," she whispered. "I'm telling the truth. I just got confused. The store is so big." Emily wasn't buying it. Her years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming that something was off. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," she said firmly, reaching for Layla's arm. Layla flinched away, her eyes wide with fear. "No, please, I didn't do anything wrong." The commotion was drawing more attention now. An elderly couple whispered to each other, shaking their heads disapprovingly. A young mother pulled her child closer, eyeing the scene warily. Emily's voice grew louder, her frustration evident. "If you've done nothing wrong, then you have nothing to worry about. Now, come with me so we can sort this out." Tears welled up in Layla's eyes as she desperately looked around the store, hoping to catch a glimpse of her father. "Dad," she called out weakly, her voice cracking. "Dad, where are you?" Emily's patience had reached its limit. Her voice took on a commanding tone as she pointed at Layla's small shoulder bag. "Empty your bag, now!" Layla's eyes widened in disbelief. "But I didn't take anything," she protested weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that's true, then you have nothing to hide," Emily insisted, her stance rigid and unyielding. "Show me what's in your bag." With trembling hands, Layla fumbled with the zipper of her bag. Her anxiety made her fingers clumsy, and she struggled to open it. The more she fumbled, the more suspicious Emily became. "Come on, hurry up," Emily urged, her tone sharp with impatience. By now, a small crowd had gathered around them. Curious onlookers watched the scene unfold, their faces a mix of concern and judgment. Layla could feel their eyes on her, which only made her more nervous. "I'm trying," Layla said, her voice cracking as tears began to form in her eyes. She finally managed to open the bag, but in her haste, she accidentally tipped it over. The contents spilled out onto the floor. A small wallet, a phone, some tissues, and a few other personal items. Emily quickly bent down to examine the scattered belongings, her eyes scanning for anything suspicious. Layla stood frozen, watching helplessly as the officer rifled through her personal items. The onlookers murmured among themselves. Some shook their heads while others whispered their theories about what was happening. Layla felt exposed and vulnerable, wishing she could disappear. "See?" Layla said softly, her voice quivering. "I told you. I didn't take anything." But Emily wasn't satisfied. She stood up, her eyes narrowed. "Turn out your pockets," she demanded. Layla's hands shook as she complied, pulling out the lining of her empty pockets. Tears were now flowing freely down her cheeks, and she struggled to hold back sobs. The situation had become unbearably uncomfortable for Layla. She felt humiliated and scared, surrounded by strangers who were watching her every move. She looked around desperately, hoping to see her father's familiar face in the crowd, but he was nowhere to be seen. As the tense scene unfolded, Mr. Samuel Richards emerged from the back of the store, his inspection complete. He immediately noticed the commotion near the front and quickened his pace, his heart sinking as he recognized his daughter at the center of it all. "Layla," he called out, pushing through the crowd, "what's going on here?" The sight that greeted him was enough to make his blood boil. His daughter stood trembling, tears streaming down her face, her belongings scattered on the floor. A stern-looking police officer loomed over her, while curious onlookers gawked at the scene. "Layla, sweetheart," Mr. Richards said softly, placing a protective arm around his daughter's shoulders. He turned to Emily, his eyes flashing with anger and disbelief. "Officer, what is the meaning of this?" Emily straightened her posture, her voice firm as she addressed Mr. Richards. "Sir, I caught this young woman behaving suspiciously. I have reason to believe she may have been shoplifting." Mr. Richards' jaw clenched, his voice low and controlled as he spoke. "Shoplifting? My daughter? That's absurd. Layla would never do such a thing." "With all due respect, sir," Emily continued, her tone unyielding, "I observed her wandering aimlessly through the store for an extended period. When questioned, she became nervous and evasive." Mr. Richards looked down at his daughter, who was now clinging to him, her body shaking with silent sobs. He felt a surge of protective anger wash over him. "Officer," he said, his voice rising slightly, "my daughter has social anxiety. She gets nervous in unfamiliar places. I was inspecting the store for renovations and asked her to wait for me. That's all that was happening here." Emily's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Even so, her behavior was suspicious enough to warrant investigation. I was simply doing my job." Mr. Richards took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure. "Your job? Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass innocent people based on unfounded suspicions." The onlookers shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement with Mr. Richards's words. Emily glanced around, suddenly aware of the crowd's changing mood. "I understand you're upset, sir," Emily said, her voice losing some of its earlier conviction. "But I had to follow protocol." "Protocol?" Mr. Richards interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Is it protocol to publicly humiliate a young girl without any evidence of wrongdoing? To make her empty her bag and turn out her pockets in front of strangers?" Mr. Richards took a deep breath, his anger giving way to a weary sadness. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of disappointment and determination. "Officer," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I think there's been a big misunderstanding here. Layla wasn't wandering around because she was up to no good. She was here with me." Emily's brow furrowed, confusion replacing her earlier certainty. "With you? But I didn't see—" Mr. Richards nodded patiently. "I'm here to finalize some renovation plans for the store. I'm the new owner of the store, you see. Layla came along to keep me company, but she's not used to places like this." He gently squeezed Layla's shoulder and she looked up at him gratefully. Mr. Richards continued, "My daughter has social anxiety. Being in busy, unfamiliar places can be overwhelming for her. She was probably just trying to find a quiet spot while waiting for me." As Mr. Richards spoke, Emily's face began to change. The stern mask of authority slowly crumbled, replaced by a dawning realization. She looked at Layla, really looked at her for the first time, and saw not a suspicious character, but a frightened young woman. I didn't know," Emily stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. "I just thought—" Mr. Richards nodded, his voice softening. "I know what you thought, officer, but sometimes things aren't what they seem at first glance." Emily's eyes darted between Mr. Richards and Layla, then to the scattered contents of Layla's bag on the floor. The weight of her actions began to sink in, and a sick feeling grew in the pit of her stomach. "Oh no," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "What have I done?" The crowd around them had grown quiet, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of sympathy and embarrassment. Emily felt their eyes on her, judging her, and she knew she had made a terrible mistake. Emily felt her heart sink as she looked at Layla's terrified face. The young woman's eyes were wide with fear, her hands trembling as she clung to her father. In that moment, the reality of Emily's actions hit her like a ton of bricks. "I'm so sorry," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt a lump forming in her throat as shame washed over her. How could she have been so quick to judge? Mr. Richards gently stroked Layla's hair, murmuring soft words of comfort. Then he turned to Emily, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Officer Thompson," he said, his voice firm but not unkind, "I hope you understand the harm that assumptions like yours can cause." Emily nodded, unable to speak. Mr. Richards continued, "My daughter came here today to spend time with me. Instead, she's been humiliated and scared half to death. All because of how she looks and how her anxiety made her act." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she listened. She wanted to look away, to hide from the truth of his words, but she forced herself to meet Mr. Richards's gaze. "This isn't just about today," Mr. Richards went on. "It's about a lifetime of experiences like this. It's about people making snap judgments based on nothing but appearance and prejudice." Emily felt each word like a physical blow. She had always prided herself on being a good cop, on protecting people. But now she saw how her own biases had turned her into exactly the kind of threat she had sworn to protect against. "I never meant to," Emily started, but the words died in her throat. What could she say? That she didn't mean to hurt anyone? That she was just doing her job? She knew those excuses rang hollow. Mr. Richards nodded as if he understood her unspoken thoughts. "I know you didn't set out to cause harm," he said softly. "But that's the thing about prejudice. It doesn't always announce itself. It sneaks in, coloring our perceptions without us even realizing it." Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what she had to do, even though every fiber of her being wanted to run away and hide. With shaky legs, she stepped forward, facing the small crowd that had gathered around them. I need to say something," Emily began, her voice trembling. She turned to Layla and Mr. Richards, meeting their eyes with difficulty. "I made a terrible mistake today. I jumped to conclusions based on nothing but my own prejudices, and I hurt you both in the process. I'm so sorry." Layla's eyes widened in surprise while Mr. Richards' expression softened slightly. Emily continued, her words coming faster now, driven by the need to make things right. "I should never have accused you, Layla. I should have taken the time to understand instead of making assumptions. My actions were wrong, and they go against everything I should stand for as a police officer." Emily's voice cracked as she fought back tears. "Mr. Richards, you're absolutely right about the harm that assumptions like mine can cause. I see that now, and I'm ashamed of my behavior." The crowd around them had gone quiet, listening intently to Emily's words. Some nodded in approval, while others looked on with sympathy. "I want you both to know that I take full responsibility for my actions," Emily said, her voice growing stronger with resolve. "I promise to do better, to learn from this, and to work on confronting my own biases." As Emily finished speaking, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. But along with the relief came a deep, gnawing sense of guilt. How many times had she made similar assumptions in the past? How many people had she hurt without even realizing it? The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just about today. It was about her entire approach to her job, her interactions with the community she was meant to serve. Emily knew that a simple apology wasn't enough. She needed to change, to grow, to become the kind of officer who truly protected all members of her community. As the crowd began to disperse and Mr. Richards gently led Layla away, Emily stood rooted to the spot. Her mind raced with thoughts of how she could make amends, not just to Layla and Mr. Richards, but to everyone she had wronged through her biased actions. Emily left the grocery store in a daze, her mind reeling from the events that had just unfolded. As she drove home, the weight of her actions pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She couldn't shake the image of Layla's terrified face or the disappointment in Mr. Richards' eyes. Once home, Emily collapsed onto her couch, her body trembling. She buried her face in her hands, hot tears spilling through her fingers. "How could I have been so wrong?" she whispered to the empty room. As the night wore on, Emily tossed and turned in bed, unable to find peace. Every time she closed her eyes, memories flooded her mind. Not just of today, but of other incidents throughout her career. She saw faces of people she had stopped, questioned, and treated with suspicion, all based on her own biases. The next morning, Emily called in sick to work. She couldn't face putting on her uniform, not when she felt so unworthy of it. Instead, she spent the day poring over her past cases, her stomach churning as she recognized patterns in her behavior that she had never noticed before. By the third day, Emily knew she needed more time to process everything. She requested a week off from her captain, who agreed, hearing the distress in her voice. With time stretching before her, Emily decided to use it wisely. She began researching bias in policing, reading articles and watching documentaries that opened her eyes to the systemic issues she had been a part of. Each new piece of information felt like a punch to the gut, but Emily forced herself to keep going. She started journaling, pouring out her thoughts and feelings onto paper. As she wrote, Emily began to see a path forward, a way to not only change herself but to potentially make a difference in her department. "I can't undo what I've done," Emily wrote one evening, her pen flying across the page. But I can learn from it. I can do better. I have to do better. With a trembling hand, Emily knocked on the Richards' front door. Her heart raced as she waited, wondering if they would even want to see her. After a moment that felt like an eternity, the door opened, and Mr. Richards stood before her. "Officer Thompson," he said, his voice calm but guarded. Emily swallowed hard. "Mr. Richards, I came to apologize again. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I needed to say it face to face." Mr. Richards studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. Emily followed him into a cozy living room, where he gestured for her to sit on the sofa. Mr. Richards took a seat in an armchair across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Mr. Richards, I'm so sorry for what I did to Layla," Emily began, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize now how wrong I was." Mr. Richards leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Officer Thompson, what happened to Layla wasn't just a one-time incident. It's part of a much larger problem that we've faced our entire lives." He took a deep breath before continuing. "Every day we wake up knowing that we might be judged, questioned, or worse, simply because of the color of our skin. It wears you down, bit by bit." Emily listened, her heart heavy as Mr. Richards shared story after story of the discrimination his family had faced. He told her about job interviews that mysteriously fell through, about being followed in stores, about the constant fear of being pulled over while driving. "And Layla," Mr. Richards said, his voice softening. "She's had to watch all of this since she was a little girl. It's shaped her entire worldview. She's always been shy, but the constant stress and fear have made her so anxious in public places." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes as she began to truly understand the impact of her actions and the larger system she had been a part of. Mr. Richards leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he recalled memories from Layla's childhood. "When Layla was just 6 years old, we took her to the park for a birthday picnic," he began, his voice soft with nostalgia. "She was so excited to play with the other children." Emily listened intently, her heart heavy with each word. "But as soon as we arrived, the other parents started calling their kids away," Mr. Richards continued. "One mother even told her daughter not to play with those people. Layla didn't understand why no one wanted to be her friend." Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she imagined little Layla, confused and hurt on what should have been a happy day. Mr. Richards went on, sharing story after story. He told Emily about Layla's first day of school, when her teacher assumed she couldn't read as well as the other children. He described the time a store clerk followed Layla around, accusing her of shoplifting when she was just looking for a birthday gift for her mother. With each tale, Emily's guilt deepened. She began to see how these experiences had slowly chipped away at Layla's confidence, shaping her into the anxious young woman she was today. By the time Layla reached high school, Mr. Richards said, his voice tinged with sadness, she had learned to make herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. She stopped raising her hand in class, even when she knew the answers. She avoided crowded places, afraid of drawing attention to herself. Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. She thought about her own actions at the grocery store, how she had added another painful experience to Layla's already heavy burden. "Mr. Richards," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." Mr. Richards nodded, acknowledging her words. "It's not just about one incident, Officer Thompson. It's about a lifetime of experiences that have taught Layla to be afraid of the world around her." As Emily listened, she felt something shift inside her. The weight of her actions, combined with the stories Mr. Richards shared, planted a seed of change in her heart. She knew that simply feeling bad wasn't enough. She had to do better, be better. Emily returned home, her mind still reeling from her conversation with Mr. Richards. She sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at her laptop screen. With trembling fingers, she typed, "Effects of racial discrimination," into the search bar. As the results loaded, Emily took a deep breath. She clicked on the first article, titled, "The Long-Lasting Impact of Racial Bias." Her eyes widened as she read about the psychological toll of constant prejudice, She learned how repeated experiences of discrimination could lead to anxiety, depression, and a host of other mental health issues. Determined to understand more, Emily dove deeper. She found documentaries that shared personal stories of individuals who had faced racial profiling. As she watched, tears streamed down her face. The stories resonated with her, reminding her of Layla's experiences. One documentary particularly struck her. It featured a young black man who described being constantly followed in stores, just like Layla. Emily paused the video, her hand covering her mouth as she realized how many times she might have caused similar pain without even realizing it. Emily spent hours reading articles, watching videos, and educating herself. She learned about microaggressions, systemic racism, and the concept of white privilege. Each new piece of information shifted her perspective, opening her eyes to a reality she had never fully acknowledged before. As the night wore on, Emily found herself on a website about implicit bias. She took a test that revealed her own unconscious prejudices. The results shook her to her core, but instead of feeling defensive, she felt motivated to change. Emily scribbled notes, bookmarked pages, and created a reading list for herself. She was determined to continue this journey of education and self-reflection. As she learned more about the experiences of those she had wrongfully judged in the past, Emily's worldview began to transform. Emily stood nervously at the entrance of the community center, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door, stepping into a room filled with people from diverse backgrounds. The chatter died down as heads turned to look at her, and Emily felt a wave of discomfort wash over her. She spotted an empty chair near the back and quickly made her way to it, trying to avoid eye contact. As she sat down, she overheard snippets of conversations around her. People were discussing local issues, sharing personal stories, and expressing their frustrations with the system. The meeting began, and Emily listened intently as community members took turns speaking about their experiences. A young man stood up and recounted a recent encounter with the police that left him feeling humiliated and scared. Emily's heart sank as she recognized some of her own past behaviors in the officer's actions. As the meeting progressed, Emily found herself becoming more engaged. She leaned forward in her chair, hanging on every word. The stories shared were eye-opening, revealing a side of the community she had never truly seen before. During a break, Emily hesitantly approached a small group of people. She introduced herself, her voice shaky but determined. "I'm here to learn," she said softly. "I want to understand how I can be a better officer for this community." The group welcomed her, though some remained cautious. An older woman named Mrs. Johnson smiled warmly at Emily. "It takes courage to come here and listen," she said. "We appreciate that you're trying to understand." Over the next few weeks, Emily attended more meetings and events. Each time she felt a little more comfortable. She began to recognize familiar faces and engage in deeper conversations. She listened to stories of struggle, resilience, and hope. At one event, Emily found herself in a discussion about police reform. Instead of becoming defensive, she listened carefully to the concerns raised. She shared some of her own experiences and admitted to her past mistakes. The conversation was difficult but productive, and Emily left feeling both challenged and inspired. As she continued to attend these gatherings, Emily's resolve to become a better officer grew stronger. She began to see her role in the community in a new light, not just as an enforcer of laws, but as a protector and supporter of all people. Emily took a deep breath as she stood outside Sergeant Davis's office. Her heart raced, but she knew this conversation was necessary. She knocked on the door, her knuckles barely making a sound. "Come in," Sergeant Davis called out. Emily stepped inside, her posture stiff and her eyes filled with determination. "Sergeant Davis, do you have a moment? I need to talk to you about something important." The sergeant looked up from his paperwork, noticing the serious expression on Emily's face. "Of course, Officer Thompson. Have a seat." Emily sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She took another deep breath and began, "Sir, I made a mistake recently at the local grocery store. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I wrongly accused someone of shoplifting." Sergeant Davis leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Go on," he said gently. Emily recounted the incident with Layla Richards, her voice trembling slightly as she described her actions and the hurt she had caused. She explained how the experience had opened her eyes to her own prejudices and the need for change. "I've been attending community meetings and events," Emily continued. "I'm trying to learn and understand better. I wanted you to know about this incident and my efforts to improve." Sergeant Davis listened intently, his expression softening as Emily spoke. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Officer Thompson, I appreciate your honesty. It takes a lot of courage to admit to a mistake like this." Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Sergeant Davis continued, "I'm impressed by your willingness to change and your commitment to self-improvement. This kind of self-reflection is exactly what we need in our department." "Thank you, sir," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want you to know that you have my full support," Sergeant Davis assured her. "Continue your journey of learning and growth. If you need any resources or assistance, don't hesitate to ask." Emily nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. "I will, sir. Thank you for understanding." As she stood to leave, Sergeant Davis added, "Emily, what you're doing is important. Keep it up. You have the potential to make a real difference in our community." Emily's journey of self-improvement continued as she sought out ways to actively engage with her community. One sunny Saturday morning, she found herself standing in front of the local community center, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. She took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Inside, she was greeted by the warm smile of Mrs. Johnson, the center's coordinator. "Officer Thompson, it's wonderful to see you here. Are you ready to help out today?" Emily nodded, her voice filled with determination. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to do whatever I can." Over the next few weeks, Emily became a regular volunteer at the center. She helped serve meals to the elderly, tutored struggling students, and even organized a clothing drive for families in need. With each passing day, she felt her heart opening up more and more to the people she once viewed with suspicion. One afternoon, as Emily was helping a young boy with his math homework, she noticed his mother watching them with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. The woman approached Emily hesitantly. "Officer Thompson, I want to thank you for helping my son," she said softly. "I never thought I'd see a police officer doing something like this." Emily felt a lump in her throat. "I'm just trying to do what's right," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Alongside her volunteer work, Emily began attending workshops on inclusivity and bias training. At first, she felt out of place, surrounded by social workers and community leaders. But as she listened to their stories and experiences, she found herself nodding along, recognizing her own past mistakes in their words. During one particularly impactful session, the facilitator asked everyone to share a moment when they realized their own biases. When it was Emily's turn, she hesitated for a moment before recounting the incident with Layla at the grocery store. As she spoke, she felt a weight lifting off her shoulders. "That moment changed everything for me," Emily concluded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I realized I had to do better, not just for myself, but for everyone in this community." As the weeks turned into months, Emily noticed a change in herself. She found herself smiling more, listening more intently to people's concerns, and approaching situations with a newfound empathy. Her colleagues at the police station began to notice too, commenting on her gentler demeanor and improved rapport with the public. Emily found herself drawn back to the grocery store where her journey of self-reflection had begun. At first, she felt a twinge of discomfort as she walked through the automatic doors, remembering the painful incident with Layla. But she pushed through those feelings, determined to make amends. On her first visit back, Emily approached the store manager, Mr. Thompson. "I'd like to help out here if that's okay," she said, her voice tinged with hope. "I want to make things right." Mr. Thompson, surprised but impressed by her initiative, agreed. From that day on, Emily became a familiar face at the store during her off-duty hours. She started small, offering to help elderly customers reach items on high shelves or assisting parents struggling with fussy children. Her uniform was replaced with casual clothes, but her badge of kindness shone brightly. One day, Emily noticed a young woman looking lost and confused in the produce section. Instead of jumping to conclusions, she approached with a gentle smile. "Hi there. Can I help you find something?" she asked warmly. The woman looked relieved. "Oh, thank you. I'm new in town and I can't seem to find the organic section." Emily's eyes lit up. "No problem at all. I'd be happy to show you around." As weeks passed, regular customers began to recognize Emily. They'd greet her with smiles and waves, some even stopping to chat. The store employees, too, noticed the change in her. They saw how she patiently helped a flustered mother calm her crying toddler, or how she'd spend extra time explaining product labels to an elderly gentleman. Mr. Thompson couldn't help but comment on the positive change. "You know, Emily," he said one day, "I've noticed a real difference in the atmosphere here since you started helping out. Customers seem more at ease, and there's a sense of community I haven't felt before." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She knew she still had a long way to go, but hearing that her efforts were making a difference gave her hope. As Emily continued her volunteer work at the grocery store, she found herself drawn to helping those who seemed anxious or overwhelmed, much like Layla had been. She remembered how her own lack of understanding had caused pain, and she was determined to do better. One quiet afternoon, Emily noticed a young man standing frozen in the middle of an aisle, his eyes darting nervously from shelf to shelf. She approached him slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hi there," she said softly. "Is everything okay? Can I help you find something?" The man looked at her, relief washing over his face. I can't find the cereal I need. There are so many choices, and I don't know where to look." Emily smiled warmly. "That's no problem at all. Let's find it together, okay?" As they walked through the store, Emily shared a bit of her own story. "You know, I used to think everyone should be able to handle busy places like this easily. But I've learned that's not true. We all have our own challenges." The young man nodded, listening intently. "I made a big mistake once," Emily continued, "judging someone who was feeling overwhelmed, but that taught me a valuable lesson about understanding and kindness." As they found the cereal, the man thanked her with a grateful smile. "It means a lot that you took the time to help me," he said. Emily's heart swelled with warmth. That's what we're here for, to help each other out. Over time, Emily became known as the go-to person for anyone feeling anxious or lost in the store. She'd often share her own experiences, using them as a way to connect with others and spread a message of inclusivity. "We're all different," she'd say to those she helped, "and that's what makes our community special. The key is to be patient and understanding with each other." As weeks turned into months, the change in Emily became more and more apparent. Her once rigid demeanor had softened, replaced by a genuine warmth and empathy that touched everyone she encountered. As word spread about Emily's transformation, more community members began to open up to her. She found herself invited to neighborhood barbecues, local meetings, and even family gatherings. Each interaction taught her something new, broadening her perspective and deepening her understanding of the diverse experiences within her community. At one such gathering, Emily found herself in a heartfelt conversation with Mr. Torres, a local business owner she had once viewed with unwarranted suspicion. "Officer Thompson," he said, his eyes kind, "I never thought I'd say this, but you've become a real asset to our community. Your journey shows us all that change is possible." Emily felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "I can't thank you all enough for giving me a second chance," she replied, her voice thick with gratitude. "You've helped me see the world in a whole new way." As she looked around at the smiling faces surrounding her, Emily realized that her role as a police officer had taken on a new meaning. She wasn't just enforcing laws, she was building bridges, fostering understanding, and creating a sense of unity in her community. This epiphany struck Emily with full force. She understood now that her journey of redemption wasn't just about making amends for past mistakes. It was about using her position to actively promote peace and inclusivity, to be a force for positive change in a world that desperately needed it. Emily's tireless efforts to change her behavior and mindset began to bear fruit. As she continued her volunteer work and community outreach, people started to notice the genuine transformation in her demeanor and actions. the once rigid and biased officer, had become a beacon of compassion and understanding in the neighborhood. One sunny afternoon, as Emily helped organize a community garden project, she overheard whispers of appreciation from the volunteers around her. "Can you believe how much Officer Thompson has changed?" one woman said to another. "She's become such a positive force in our community." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest at these words. While she never sought recognition for her efforts, knowing that people saw and appreciated her growth meant the world to her. Unbeknownst to Emily, Layla and Mr. Richards had been quietly observing her progress from afar. They had heard about her volunteer work, her participation in community events, and her genuine efforts to educate herself and others about inclusivity. One evening, as Mr. Richards sat with Layla in their living room, he broached the subject. "Layla, honey," he said gently, "I've been thinking about Officer Thompson. Have you noticed how much she's changed since that day?" Layla nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I have, Dad. It's pretty amazing, actually. She seems like a completely different person now." Mr. Richards smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I think it might be time for us to reach out to her. What do you think?" Layla hesitated for a moment, memories of that painful day at the grocery store flashing through her mind. But then she remembered the stories she'd heard about Emily's dedication to making amends, her volunteer work, and her efforts to understand and support people like herself. "You're right, Dad," Layla said, her voice growing stronger. "I think it's time. She's really trying to make things right." Mr. Richards squeezed his daughter's hand, proud of her willingness to open her heart. "How about we invite her over for dinner next week? It would be a good opportunity to talk and show her that we see the positive changes she's made." Layla nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "That sounds like a great idea, Dad. I think I'm ready to give her a chance." The Richards home was filled with the aroma of a home-cooked meal as Mr. Richards and Layla prepared for their special guest. Layla's hands trembled slightly as she set the table, her nerves still raw from the memory of that day at the grocery store, but her father's reassuring presence helped calm her racing heart. The doorbell rang and Mr. Richards answered it with a warm smile. "Officer Thompson, welcome to our home," he said, gesturing for Emily to enter. Emily stepped inside, a bouquet of flowers in her hands. "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Richards," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. "And please, call me Emily." As they sat down to dinner, the initial awkwardness slowly melted away. Mr. Richards led the conversation, asking Emily about her recent community involvement. "It's been an eye-opening experience," Emily shared, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I've learned so much from the people I've met. It's changed the way I see my role as an officer." Layla, who had been quiet for most of the meal, finally spoke up. "I've heard about the work you've been doing," she said softly. "The community center mentioned how you've been helping people with social anxieties." Emily's face softened as she turned to Layla. "Yes, it's become very important to me. I wanted to understand and help people who might be in situations similar to yours." Layla took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want you to know, I appreciate the effort you've made to change. It means a lot to see someone take responsibility like that." Emily's eyes welled up with tears. "Layla, I can't express how sorry I am for what happened that day. Your forgiveness means more to me than you could ever know." Mr. Richards watched the exchange with pride, seeing the growth in both women. "Emily," he said, "your actions have had a ripple effect in our community. People are noticing the change, and it's inspiring others to be more understanding and inclusive." Emily wiped away a tear, overwhelmed by the kindness and forgiveness she was receiving. "Thank you both for giving me this chance. I promise to keep working hard to make our community a better place for everyone." As the dinner progressed, Mr. Richards leaned back in his chair, his expression turning more serious. "Emily, I want you to understand that while we appreciate your efforts, the challenges Layla faces are ongoing." Emily nodded, her face showing genuine concern. "I'd like to hear more about that, if you're willing to share." Mr. Richards glanced at Layla, who gave a small nod of approval. He continued, Every day is a new battle for Layla. Simple tasks that many take for granted can be overwhelming for her. Layla spoke up, her voice soft but determined. Going to the grocery store that day, it was a big step for me. I've been trying to push myself, but sometimes it feels like I'm moving backwards. Emily listened intently, her heart aching for Layla's struggles. I can't imagine how difficult that must be, she said gently. Mr. Richards reached out and patted Layla's hand. We've found ways to cope. We practice breathing exercises, and I often accompany Layla when she needs to go out. But it's not always easy. Some days are better than others, Layla added. I'm trying to find a job, but the thought of interviews terrifies me. Emily leaned forward, her eyes bright with an idea. Have you considered working with animals? I know the local shelter is always looking for gentle souls to help care for their rescues. Layla's face lit up at the suggestion. I love animals. They don't judge, do they? Mr. Richards smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. That's a wonderful idea, Emily. We'll look into that, won't we, Layla? Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, seeing the positive impact of her suggestion. If you'd like, I could introduce you to the shelter manager. She's a kind woman, very understanding. That would be amazing, Layla said, a hint of excitement in her voice. Mr. Richards looked at Emily with gratitude. Your support means a lot to us, Emily. It's heartening to see how far you've come. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm just grateful for the chance to make things right. Please, if there's ever anything I can do to help, don't hesitate to ask. As the evening wore on, the conversation flowed more easily. Emily listened with empathy as Mr. Richards and Layla shared more about their daily struggles and small victories. She offered words of encouragement and practical suggestions when she could, her heart full of compassion for this family that had shown her such forgiveness. Emily's experience with the Richards family had sparked a fire within her. She realized that her personal growth could have a much broader impact if she shared it with her fellow officers. With renewed determination, Emily approached Sergeant Davis the following day. Sergeant, I've been thinking about ways we can improve our relationship with the community, Emily said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. Sergeant Davis leaned forward, intrigued. I'm all ears, Thompson. What do you have in mind? Emily took a deep breath and laid out her ideas. I believe we need more comprehensive training on bias awareness and community engagement. Our officers need to understand the impact of their actions on the people we serve. Sergeant Davis nodded thoughtfully. That's a solid idea, Thompson. How do you propose we implement this? Over the next few weeks, Emily worked tirelessly with Sergeant Davis to develop a new training program. They brought in experts on racial bias, invited community leaders to speak, and organized interactive workshops. Emily even shared her own story, using her experience with Layla as a powerful example of how unchecked biases could harm innocent people. As the program rolled out, Emily found herself at the forefront, leading discussions and facilitating exercises. She watched with pride as her fellow officers engaged in honest conversations about their own biases and brainstormed ways to build trust within the community. One afternoon, after a particularly impactful session, Officer Rodriguez approached Emily. You know, Thompson, I used to think you were just a by-the-book cop, but what you're doing here, it's really opening my eyes. Emily smiled, touched by her colleague's words. We're all learning together, Rodriguez. That's what matters. As the weeks passed, Emily began to notice subtle changes in her fellow officers' behavior. They were more patient during calls, took time to listen to community members, and approached situations with greater empathy. The positive feedback from the community started to pour in, and Emily felt a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before in her career. As Emily's relationship with the community continued to strengthen, her role within the police department began to evolve. Her journey from a rigid, by-the-book officer to a compassionate and understanding public servant had not gone unnoticed. Many of her fellow officers, inspired by her transformation, began to seek her guidance. One day, a young officer named Jake approached Emily after a community outreach event. Officer Thompson, he said hesitantly, I was wondering if I could talk to you about something. Emily smiled warmly, sensing his nervousness. Of course, Jake. What's on your mind? Jake fidgeted with his hat as he spoke. I've been struggling with some of the situations we face on patrol. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm making the right calls. The way you handle things, it's different. How do you do it? Emily's eyes softened as she remembered her own struggles. It's not always easy, Jake. But the key is to approach every situation with empathy and an open mind. Try to see beyond your first impressions and really listen to people. As they talked, Emily shared some of her experiences, including her encounter with Layla and how it had changed her perspective. Jake listened intently, his eyes widening as he began to understand the impact of unchecked biases. Word spread quickly about Emily's willingness to mentor other officers. Soon, she found herself surrounded by colleagues eager to learn from her experiences. Emily organized informal meetings where officers could discuss challenging situations they had faced and brainstorm more empathetic approaches. During one such meeting, Officer Maria Rodriguez shared a story about a recent encounter with a group of teenagers in the park. I almost issued citations for loitering, she admitted. But then I remembered what you said about taking the time to understand the situation. Turns out they were just waiting for their parents after a community cleanup event. Emily nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of awareness we need to cultivate. Every interaction is an opportunity to build trust and understanding. As the weeks passed, Emily noticed a shift in the atmosphere of the precinct. Officers were sharing more stories of positive community interactions, and complaints against the department had decreased. The change was palpable, and it filled Emily with a sense of purpose and pride. As Emily patrolled the bustling streets near the local mall, her eyes fell upon a sight that would have once prompted a very different reaction from her. A black mother and her young child sat huddled near the entrance, a cardboard sign propped up beside them asking for help. In the past, Emily would have immediately moved to shoo them away, citing ordinances against loitering or panhandling. But now, with her newfound perspective, she saw the situation through a lens of compassion. Emily parked her patrol car and approached the pair slowly, careful not to startle them. The mother's eyes widened with fear as she saw the officer coming closer, and she instinctively pulled her child closer to her side. "Ma'am," Emily said softly, crouching down to their level. "I'm Officer Thompson. Is everything okay? Can I help you with anything?" The mother's lip quivered as she looked up at Emily, tears welling in her eyes. I'm sorry, officer. We'll move along. We have nowhere else to go." Emily's heart clenched at the pain in the woman's voice. "It's all right," she assured her. "I'm not here to make you leave. I want to help if I can. Can you tell me what's going on?" The woman, who introduced herself as Tanya, began to share her story. Through tears and halting words, she explained how she had lost her job, then her apartment, and now found herself on the streets with her 5-year-old son, Marcus. As Emily listened, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She thought about how differently she would have handled this situation just a few months ago, and the realization made her even more determined to help. "Tanya," Emily said gently, "I know it might not seem like it right now, but there are resources available to help you and Marcus. Would you be willing to let me make a few calls and see what we can do?" Tanya nodded hesitantly, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. Emily spent the next hour making calls to local shelters and social services, leveraging her connections to find a safe place for Tanya and Marcus to stay. Emily's transformation had become evident to everyone in the community, especially at the grocery store where her journey of change had begun. Every Saturday morning, she would arrive at the store, not in her police uniform but in casual clothes with a warm smile on her face. The store manager, Mr. Johnson, would greet her with a friendly nod as she put on her volunteer vest. "Good morning, Emily. Glad to have you here again," Mr. Johnson said, handing her a clipboard. "Happy to be here, Mr. Johnson," Emily replied, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. As she made her way through the aisles, Emily kept an eye out for anyone who might need assistance. She spotted an elderly woman struggling to reach a can on a high shelf. "Let me help you with that, ma'am," Emily offered, easily retrieving the item. The woman beamed at her. Thank you, dear. You're always so helpful. Emily chatted with the woman for a few moments, making sure she had everything she needed before moving on. As she walked, she overheard a heated argument between two customers over the last carton of milk. Drawing on her police training and newfound empathy, Emily approached the pair. "Gentlemen, is everything all right here?" she asked calmly. The men, recognizing Emily, immediately lowered their voices. Emily listened to both sides and then suggested a compromise that left both customers satisfied. As they walked away, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how different this interaction was from her confrontation with Layla months ago. Throughout the day, Emily helped customers find items, assisted with bagging groceries, and even shared stories of her personal growth with those who asked. Her presence seemed to create a ripple effect of kindness and understanding throughout the store. As the day wound down, a young black teenager entered the store, looking nervous and out of place. Emily recognized the look of anxiety on his face, reminding her of Layla. She approached him with a gentle smile. "Hi there," she said softly. "I'm Emily. Is there anything I can help you find today?" The teenager, initially wary, relaxed a bit at Emily's friendly demeanor. "I'm looking for ingredients for my mom's birthday cake," he admitted shyly. "That's wonderful," Emily exclaimed. "Let's see if we can find everything you need." As they walked through the store together, Emily shared a bit about her own journey of learning and growth. The teenager listened intently, visibly becoming more comfortable as they talked. As the summer sun bathed the city in a warm glow, Emily Thompson stood nervously in front of the police department. Her colleagues and community members gathered for a special ceremony. Chief Roberts, a tall man with graying hair, stepped up to the podium. "Today we're here to recognize one of our own," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Officer Emily Thompson has shown us what it truly means to serve and protect." Emily's heart raced as she listened to the chief recount her journey. He spoke of her volunteer work, her efforts to bridge gaps between the police and the community, and her dedication to fostering inclusivity. Officer Thompson's commitment to change has not only transformed her as an individual, but has also inspired our entire department, Chief Roberts continued. As Emily glanced around, she saw familiar faces in the crowd. Mr. and Mrs. Richards stood near the front, beaming with pride. Layla, looking more confident than ever, gave Emily a small wave. "It is my honor," Chief Roberts announced, "to present Officer Emily Thompson with the department's commendation for community service and inclusivity." The crowd erupted in applause as Emily stepped forward to accept the award. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the plaque, overwhelmed by the moment. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "This journey has taught me so much about the true meaning of community and service. I'm grateful for the opportunity to make a difference, and I promise to continue working hard to foster understanding and inclusivity in our community." As Emily stepped back, her fellow officers surrounded her with congratulations and pats on the back. Sergeant Davis approached her with a proud smile. "You've come a long way, Thompson," he said warmly. "Your dedication has inspired changes throughout the entire force. We're implementing new training programs based on your experiences." Emily felt a surge of pride knowing that her personal growth was having a ripple effect throughout the department. As the ceremony concluded, community members came up to shake her hand and share words of appreciation. As the weeks passed, Layla found herself drawn to the community center where Emily volunteered. The once shy young woman had been slowly building her confidence, inspired by Emily's journey of growth and change. One sunny afternoon, Layla took a deep breath and stepped through the center's doors. Emily was surprised to see Layla there, but her face lit up with a warm smile. "Layla, it's great to see you here," she said, walking over to greet her. Layla nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hi, Emily. I was wondering if there might be a way I could help out here?" Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Absolutely. We're always looking for volunteers. Did you have something specific in mind?" Layla hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "I was thinking, maybe we could work together on something for people with social anxiety. You know, like what I've been dealing with?" Emily's face softened with understanding. "That's a wonderful idea, Layla. Your experience could really help others who are struggling. Over the next few weeks, Emily and Layla worked side by side, developing a support group for individuals with social anxiety. They created a safe space where people could share their experiences and learn coping strategies. Layla surprised herself with how much she enjoyed helping others. She found strength in sharing her own story, and her confidence grew with each passing day. Emily watched with pride as Layla blossomed, her quiet demeanor giving way to a gentle but assured presence. During one of their sessions, Layla stood in front of the group, her voice steady as she spoke. I know how scary it can be to face the world when you're feeling anxious, but I've learned that small steps can lead to big changes. Emily, sitting among the participants, felt a lump in her throat. She remembered the frightened young woman she had encountered in the grocery store and marveled at the transformation before her. As the group shared their experiences, Layla and Emily worked together seamlessly, offering support and guidance. Their partnership had become a powerful force for positive change in the community. After the session, Emily approached Layla with a smile. "You were amazing today," she said warmly. "Look how far you've come." Layla's eyes shimmered with unshed tears of joy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emily. Your support and understanding, it's changed everything for me." As the community gathered for the annual Unity Day celebration, Emily and Layla found themselves at the forefront of the event. Their journey together had become a symbol of progress and hope for everyone present. Emily stood beside Layla, her heart swelling with emotion as she reflected on how far she had come from the rigid, biased officer she once was. When it was time for Layla to speak, she stepped up to the microphone with a newfound confidence. Her voice, once timid and hesitant, now rang clear and strong as she addressed the crowd. "A year ago I was lost and afraid," Layla began, her eyes glistening. "But today I stand before you because of one person's willingness to change." She turned to Emily, a warm smile on her face. Emily's transformation wasn't just about her. It was about all of us learning to see beyond appearances and understand each other's struggles. As Layla continued her heartfelt speech, the audience was visibly moved. Tears welled up in the eyes of many, including Emily, who felt overwhelmed by the profound impact of her actions. "We all have the power to make a difference," Layla said, her voice filled with emotion. "When we open our hearts and minds, we can create a community where everyone feels safe and valued." Emily listened, her own tears falling freely now. She remembered the scared young woman she had encountered in the grocery store and marveled at the strong, inspiring person Layla had become. The weight of her past actions and the joy of her transformation crashed over her in waves. As Layla concluded her speech, the entire community rose to their feet in a standing ovation. The applause was deafening, but more powerful was the sense of unity that filled the air. People from all walks of life stood together, embracing the lesson that true change begins with understanding and empathy. Would you have given Officer Emily Thompson a second chance if you were Layla? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to my channel. I am spending hours upon hours writing these heartwarming stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going.